The lash of the wind was a familiar punishment. It sliced across Alara's cheeks, raw and red from the biting cold of the northern wastes. Cold was the story of her life. The cold stone floor of her cell-like room, the cold stares of the villagers, the cold iron brand that scarred the side of her neck. She pulled the thin wool of her shawl tighter, a useless gesture. The chill lived deeper than her skin. It lived in her bones, a constant reminder of what she was. Unwanted. Discarded. Marked. The brand was an ugly, jagged thing, a starburst of scar tissue that declared her a criminal. A lie. It had been pressed to her flesh 5 years ago, the night her parents' bodies were pulled from the river. Her uncle, Lord Valerius, had wept for the cameras of the court while his men held her down. He'd called it a mark of justice for her supposed treachery. She called it the price of her inheritance, which he now controlled. Now, she was just Alara, the branded girl of Oakhaven, the village at the edge of the world. She scrubbed floors and mended nets for scraps of bread and a place to sleep in a drafty storeroom. She kept her head down, her hair long to hide the mark, and her heart locked away where no one could touch it. Today, the cold held a different edge. It was laced with fear. The village elder had made the proclamation that morning, his voice trembling despite his authority. The offering was due. Once every decade, a tribute was sent to the Alpha King in his frozen citadel. A beast of a man, they said, a creature of ice and shadow who ruled the north with a merciless grip. No one ever returned from the offering. It was a death sentence disguised as a tradition, a way for the villages to dispose of their unwanted, their criminals, their branded. Alara's heart had sunk into the pit of her stomach. There were only 2 other branded individuals in Oakhaven, both old men, frail and half-mad. She knew. It would be her. A carriage, black as a raven's wing and pulled by 4 massive horses, rolled into the village square. It was an impossible luxury in this desolate place. The door opened and Lord Valerius stepped out, draped in furs, his face a mask of false sympathy. He was here to oversee the offering. He was here to seal her fate. He didn't look at her, not at first. He spoke with the elder, his voice a low, reasonable murmur that carried on the wind. Alara watched from the doorway of the fishery, the scent of salt and rot clinging to her. She saw the elder's shoulders slump in defeat. She saw Valerius's gaze finally slide to her, a flicker of cold triumph in his eyes. It was done. The law is the law, Valerius announced to the silent, watching villagers. An offering must be made, for the good of the pack, for the king. He gestured to her, not with his hand, but with a flick of his chin, as if she were an animal. I'll take this one. 2 of his guards, clad in dark leather, seized her arms. She didn't fight. What was the point? Her life had been a slow freezing, a gradual death. This was just the final, merciful snap. They forced her toward the carriage. The villagers watched, their faces a mixture of pity and relief. Relief that it wasn't them. Relief that the pariah was finally being purged. As a guard pushed her into the plush interior of the carriage, her shawl fell away. The brand on her neck was exposed to the gray light. For a moment she saw not fear in the villager's eyes, but shame, a flicker of it, quickly extinguished. Valerius climbed in after her, settling on the opposite bench. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time in years. "It is a shame," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "You have your mother's eyes. A pity they will be the last thing the beast of the north sees before he tears you apart." He smiled then, a thin, cruel curve of his lips. "Do try not to scream. It's undignified." The carriage door slammed shut, plunging them into shadow. Alara stared at the sigil on the door, a snarling wolf's head crowned with ice. She wasn't going to a king. She was being fed to a monster. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a spark. Not of hope, but of rage. A tiny, defiant ember in the frozen landscape of her soul. The journey was a blur of rumbling wheels and suffocating silence. Valerius did not speak again, content to watch her with an air of detached satisfaction. Alara huddled in her corner, the rage a small, secret warmth inside her. She would not give him the satisfaction of her tears. She would not give the beast the satisfaction of her fear. The air grew colder. The trees grew sparser, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. Frost began to creep across the inside of the carriage windows. They were climbing, ascending into the heart of winter. Finally, the carriage lurched to a halt. The door was pulled open, and the cold that rushed in was a physical blow. It was a profound, unnatural cold, a cold that stole the breath and silenced the world. Guards pulled her out. She stood on a bridge of black, ice-slicked stone that spanned a bottomless chasm. Before her rose the citadel. It wasn't built so much as carved from the mountain itself, a jagged fortress of black rock and shimmering ice, its towers piercing a permanently bruised sky. There were no banners, no lights, no signs of life. Just the oppressive silence and the soul-stealing cold. "Welcome to your new home," Valerius mocked, his voice thin in the vast emptiness. They dragged her across the bridge and through gates that opened without a sound. The throne room was a cavern of glacial ice and polished obsidian. Light filtered through a massive frozen waterfall that served as one wall, casting the chamber in an ethereal blue-gray gloom. At the far end, upon a throne carved from a single enormous block of ice, sat the Alpha King. He was not a beast. Not in the way the stories told. He was a man, massive and broad-shouldered, draped in black furs that seemed to absorb the faint light. His face was all sharp angles and harsh beauty, like a landscape carved by a glacier. His hair was black as a winter night, and his eyes were the color of a frozen sea, pale and utterly devoid of warmth. The cold wasn't just in the room, it was coming from him. A palpable aura of frost that made her teeth ache. Valerius shoved her forward and she stumbled, catching herself on the icy floor. She landed on her hands and knees, a supplicant before a frozen god. "Your Majesty," Valerius said, his voice echoing in the vast hall. He bowed low, a picture of deference. "Lord Valerius of the Southern Reach, as is tradition, I bring an offering, a branded criminal, a stain upon my pack. Worthless, but perhaps her life will serve as a token of our unwavering loyalty." Alara kept her eyes on the floor, her hair falling forward to hide her mark. She could feel the king's gaze on her, a weight heavier than any stone. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. She waited for the growl, the command to kill, the tearing of claws. Instead, a voice spoke, deep as thunder but soft as snowfall. "You have fulfilled your duty, Lord Valerius. You may go." Valerius straightened, a flicker of confusion on his face. He had expected a show, a brutal display of the king's power. "Your Majesty, she is yours to do with as you please. A small morsel to—" "I heard you," the king interrupted. The temperature in the room dropped another 10 degrees. A fine layer of frost appeared on Valerius's fur collar. "Leave her." The words were not a request. They were an absolute command, edged with a power that vibrated in the very air. Valerius paled. He bowed again, hastily this time, and practically scrambled from the throne room, his guards trailing in his wake like frightened dogs. The massive gates boomed shut, leaving Alara alone with the Alpha King. Silence. She remained on the floor, trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer bone-deep cold. She heard the soft crunch of boots on the icy floor. He was approaching. He stopped in front of her. She could feel the chill radiating from him, a physical presence. She braced herself. A large hand, encased in a black leather glove, entered her field of vision. Gently, he brushed her hair back from her neck, exposing the brand. She flinched, expecting pain, disgust. His touch was cold, so cold it was like being touched by a ghost. But it was surprisingly gentle. His fingers traced the jagged edges of the scar. She dared to lift her head, to look at him. His face was impassive, a mask of ice. But his eyes, those frozen seas held something else. Not pity, not anger, something she couldn't name. A flicker of recognition. He stared at the brand, his jaw tight. Then he looked into her eyes. The world seemed to stop. It felt as if he were looking past her skin, past her bones, into the tiny, defiant ember of rage she kept hidden in her soul. He saw it. She knew he did. He withdrew his hand and stood to his full, intimidating height. For a long moment he just looked at her, a girl in rags, kneeling on his frozen floor. Then he turned and walked back to his throne. "You may rise," he said, his voice once again a distant rumble. She pushed herself up, her limbs stiff and numb. She stood before him, small and insignificant in the vast cold hall. What now? Was this some kind of game? A cat playing with a mouse before the final kill? "What is your name?" he asked. "Ilara," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Ilara," he repeated, the name a puff of white mist in the frigid air. He studied her, his gaze intense. "You are not a prisoner here." She stared at him, confused. I don't understand. The offering. The offering is a barbaric tradition I have long tolerated for the sake of peace," he said, his voice flat. "It ends today. With you." He gestured to a smaller door, almost invisible against a wall of black rock. "A guard will show you to your chambers. You will be fed. You will be clothed. You will not be harmed." This made no sense. Why? Why her? Why spare the worthless branded girl? Was this a fate worse than death? To be kept as a pet in a frozen cage? Why? The word escaped her before she could stop it. The Alpha King's expression did not change, but something shifted in his eyes. A shadow of an emotion too deep and ancient for her to comprehend. "Because the North is no place for a stray," he said simply, "and you are a long way from home." He turned his gaze away, toward the frozen waterfall, a clear dismissal. A silent guard, materializing from the shadows, gestured for her to follow. Numbly, she obeyed, casting one last look at the solitary figure on the throne of ice. He didn't look like a beast. He looked like the loneliest man in the world. The guard led her through winding corridors of stone that seemed to drink the light. The cold was a constant companion, seeping through the soles of her worn boots. But the chambers she was brought to were an island of impossible warmth. A fire roared in a large stone hearth, casting a warm, golden glow over a room furnished with dark wood and rich, deep red tapestries. A thick fur rug covered the floor, and a large bed was piled high with quilts and blankets. It was more luxury than she had ever known. On the bed lay a simple but elegant dress of dark blue wool and a fresh set of undergarments. A tray on a small table held bread, cheese, and a steaming bowl of stew. Her stomach growled, a vulgar sound in the quiet room. This was the arrangement. She was a guest. Not a prisoner, not a sacrifice. A guest in the beast's castle. It was a lie. It had to be. This was just a more elaborate cage. Days bled into one another. She saw no one but the silent guards who brought her meals. She did not see the king. The warmth of her rooms felt like a mockery of the profound cold that permeated the rest of the fortress. She was allowed to wander, though she didn't stray far. She found a library, its shelves filled with ancient tomes, the air thick with the scent of old paper and leather. She began to read. It was a way to escape. A way to forget the silent, watching eyes she felt on her, even when she was alone. One evening, a week after her arrival, she felt a change in the air, a drop in temperature. She looked up from her book to see him standing in the doorway of her chamber. The Alpha King, Kalen. He stood in silence, a looming shadow against the firelight. He didn't enter, just watched her. The cold radiated from him, a stark contrast to the warmth of the room. He wore no gloves, and she saw his hands for the first time. They were pale, laced with faint blue veins like marble. A thin layer of frost seemed to cling to his fingertips. She sat frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. He was beautiful, she realized with a jolt. Beautiful in the way that glaciers were beautiful. Cold, merciless, and capable of crushing everything in their path. He said nothing. After a long, agonizing moment, he turned and was gone, as silently as he had appeared. He came every night after that. A silent, nightly visitation. He would stand in the doorway, a sentinel of ice, and simply watch her. She never spoke. He never spoke. It was a strange, unnerving ritual. She started to notice the details. The way his jaw was perpetually clenched, as if against some constant pain. The tremor in his hands that he tried to hide. The way he never leaned against the doorframe, never touched anything. This wasn't a monster. This was a man in a prison of his own making. One night, driven by an impulse she didn't understand, she did something different. Before settling down to read, she brewed a cup of the herbal tea the kitchens provided. It was a simple blend of chamomile and mint. She placed the steaming mug on the small table closest to the door. When he appeared that night, his icy gaze fell on the cup. He looked from the steam rising from the mug to her face. She held her breath, expecting anger, or for him to simply ignore it. He took a step into the room, then another. He walked to the table, the cold aura around him making the fire flicker and dim. He picked up the mug. She saw him flinch, almost imperceptibly, as his bare skin touched the warm ceramic. He lifted the mug and drank. He drained the entire cup in slow, deliberate swallows. He placed the empty mug back on the table with a soft click that echoed in the silent room. He looked at her, and for the first time, his mask of ice seemed to crack. Just a little. A fissure of something that looked like gratitude. He left without a word. But the boundary had been broken. The arrangement had changed. She left a cup of tea for him every night. He always came. He always drank it. Slowly, he began to step further into the room. One night, he spoke. "You are not afraid of me," he stated. It wasn't a question. She looked up from her book. "Should I be?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips, gone as quickly as it appeared. "Everyone else's." "I've had worse to be afraid of than a quiet man in a cold castle," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Her hand instinctively went to her neck, to the brand hidden beneath her dress. His eyes followed the movement. The temperature dropped. "Who did that to you?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "My uncle, Lord Valerius." Kalen's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Frost bloomed on the stone floor around his feet. "He told me you were a criminal." "He lied," she said simply. The king stared into the fire, his profile stark and grim. "I know." Their nightly meetings evolved. They were no longer silent vigils. He would talk sometimes. He told her of the north, of the ancient spirits that slept in the mountains, of the long, lonely centuries he had ruled. He never spoke of himself, of the cold that clung to him like a shroud. She, in turn, told him of her life. The small joys before her parents' death. The years of servitude and shame. She spoke the truth, unvarnished and raw. She didn't flatter him or plead. Her honesty seemed to disarm him. One night she found him in the library. He was standing before a roaring fire, one hand outstretched toward the flames, as if seeking a warmth he could never truly feel. His expression was one of profound, soul-deep loneliness. "Does it hurt?" she asked softly, stepping beside him. He didn't look at her. "What?" "The cold," she said. "The cold inside you." He pulled his hand back from the fire, clenching it into a fist. For a moment, she thought he would retreat back into his icy shell. Instead, he gave a short, bitter laugh. "It's not cold. It's power. A gift from my bloodline. A curse." He finally turned to face her, his pale eyes burning with an intensity that took her breath away. "My power is absolute. It commands the ice, the winter, but it consumes me. Every time I use it, the frost takes a little more. It's a slow death. A cage made of ice, freezing me from the inside out. Her heart ached for him. This powerful king, this feared beast, was dying. He was being eaten alive by the very thing that made him strong. Without thinking, she reached out and laid her hand on his arm. His flesh was shockingly cold, even through the thick fabric of his tunic. He flinched violently, pulling away as if burned. "Don't," he rasped, his voice raw. "Don't touch me." The rejection was a physical blow. She recoiled, shame and hurt washing over her. Of course, she was the branded girl, unclean, untouchable. He saw the look on her face, and the agony in his own expression deepened. "It's not you, Alara," he said, his voice softer, almost a plea. "It's me, my touch. It freezes. It kills. I cannot touch anything living." So that was it. His loneliness wasn't a choice. It was a sentence. He was a king who could not hold a hand, a man who could not offer a comforting touch. He was utterly, completely alone. She looked at him, at this beautiful, broken man, and she did not feel fear. She felt a deep, aching pull, a longing to reach across the frozen divide and offer a warmth she wasn't even sure she possessed. This was no longer an arrangement. It was something more, something terrifying and hopeful. She was falling for the beast, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her more than his presence ever could, that it would destroy them both. The fragile peace of their strange existence was shattered by the arrival of a royal summons. A delegation of the southern lords, led by Lord Valerius, had arrived at the citadel. They demanded an audience. Kaelin was furious. She could feel it in the very stones of the castle. The cold intensified, and frost crept down the corridors. He met with her that evening, his face a thunderous mask. "They cannot know you are here," he said, his voice tight. "They cannot know I spared you." "My uncle, he won't stop," Alara said. "He wanted me dead. When he finds out I'm alive?" "He will not find out," Kaelin cut in, his tone absolute. "You will remain in these rooms. You are not to leave. I will deal with Valerius." But Valerius was more cunning than Kaelin knew. He hadn't come for a simple audience. He had come armed with whispers and poison. For weeks, he had been spreading rumors throughout the southern packs. Rumors of a king gone mad, of a witch in the northern citadel who had ensnared the Alpha King with dark magic. A witch with a criminal's brand. The threat was not to Kaelin. It was to her. The formal assembly was held in the great throne room. Alara, confined to her chambers, could feel the tension vibrating through the castle. She paced the room like a caged animal, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She knew, with a sickening certainty, that this was about her. A young guard, one of the few who had ever shown her a sliver of kindness, came to her door. His face was pale. "The lords are in an uproar, my lady," he whispered. "Lord Valerius is making accusations. He's demanding the king produce the witch he's hiding." Alara's blood ran cold. This was Valerius's plan, to expose her, to use the court's fear and superstition against her, to force Kaelin's hand. She had to do something. She couldn't hide while he fought for her. Ignoring the guard's pleas, she ran from the room, down the frosted corridors, toward the great hall. She pushed open the heavy doors and stepped inside. The room fell silent. Dozens of lords and ladies draped in furs and jewels turned to stare at her. She saw shock, then suspicion, then hatred dawn on their faces. At the center of the room, Valerius stood, his face a mask of triumph. "Behold!" he cried, his voice ringing with false righteousness. He pointed a dramatic finger at her. "The witch, the branded whore who has poisoned our king's mind." He strode toward her and ripped the collar of her dress, exposing the brand for all to see. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. "There is the proof of her evil, a mark of treason," Valerius shouted, She has bewitched him. He spares her life when our laws demand her death. He has been compromised. He is no longer fit to rule. Alara stood frozen, the collective weight of their hatred pressing down on her. She looked past them, to the throne. Kalen was on his feet, his face a terrifying visage of pure fury. His eyes were no longer pale blue, they were blazing pools of silver light. "Silence," he commanded. The word was not loud, but it slammed into them with the force of a physical blow. The air crackled with power, and the temperature plummeted. A visible aura of shimmering frost erupted from him, washing over the room. The lords cried out, stumbling back, clutching their arms against the sudden brutal cold. "You dare!" Kalen hissed, his voice a low, deadly growl. He took a step forward, his gaze locked on Valerius. "You dare to come into my home and threaten what is mine." Mine. The word hung in the frozen air, a possessive, absolute declaration. Valerius, though pale, held his ground, a fanatic gleam in his eyes. "You see? The witch's magic controls him. He defends the indefensible. He must be saved from himself." It was a trap. Valerius was goading him, pushing him to use his power. "I was addressing my future queen," Kalen said, his voice dropping, yet carrying to every corner of the hall. He looked directly at Alara, and in his blazing silver eyes, she saw not just fury, but a desperate, protective love. The court erupted. Cries of treason and abomination filled the air. They saw a weak king, a bewitched man. They did not see the truth. To protect her, to silence them all, Kalen did exactly what Valerius wanted. He drew on his power, not just a warning this time, but a full, crushing wave of it. The world went white with frost. The great frozen waterfall behind the throne cracked and groaned. Ice exploded from the floor in jagged spikes, stopping inches from the terrified lords. The raw, untamed power of a true Alpha King filled the room, suffocating all dissent. But the cost was immediate and terrible. Kalen staggered. A strangled cry escaped his lips. The silver light in his eyes flickered and died. He looked down at his own hand, a look of horror on his face. Thick, crystalline ice was blooming across his skin, starting at his fingertips and racing up his arm. It was not the light frost she had seen before. This was dense, solid, like a glacier forming before her eyes. The cold that poured from him was no longer a presence. It was an abyss, a void that consumed all heat, all life. "Kalen!" she screamed. He collapsed. He hit the floor with a sound like shattering stone, the ice already encasing his chest. His breath came in ragged, frosty plumes. His skin was turning the color of marble, his lips blue. The frost curse, accelerated by his massive expenditure of power, was consuming him. Valerius smiled, a thin, triumphant, monstrous smile. This was his victory. He hadn't just exposed Alara, he had killed the king. "Seize the witch!" Valerius commanded the king's own guards, who stood frozen in shock and horror. "She has killed him." A few guards, loyal to Valerius's faction, moved toward her. But Alara didn't see them. She only saw Kalen, lying broken on the floor, being stolen from her by the ice. She shoved past the guards with a strength she didn't know she possessed and fell to her knees at his side. She reached for him, her hands hovering over his chest. The cold coming off him was a wall, so intense it felt like fire. His eyes, filmed with ice, found hers. His lips moved, forming a single frosted word. "Run." It was the last thing he would ever ask of her, and the one thing she could never do. "No," she whispered, the word a prayer and a curse. "I will not leave you." She looked at the triumphant face of her uncle, at the fearful, hateful faces of the court. They had done this. They had taken everything from her. Her parents, her name, her freedom. And now they were taking him. The tiny ember of rage she had nursed for 5 long years, the one he had seen in her soul on that first day, roared into an inferno. A defiant scream tore from her throat. It was a sound of pure, undiluted grief and fury. She would not let them win. She would not let him die. She slammed her hands down onto his chest, onto the creeping crystalline ice that was stealing his heart. She ignored the searing, freezing pain that shot up her arms. She closed her eyes and poured everything she was into that touch. All her pain, all her loneliness, all her defiance, and all the fierce, desperate love she felt for this impossible, broken man. She refused to let him go. For a moment, nothing happened. The ice continued to spread. His faint heartbeat faltered. Despair clawed at her. Then, something shifted. A warmth bloomed under her palms. Faint at first, a tiny spark in the vast Arctic cold. She focused on it, nurtured it with her will. The spark became a glow. The glow became a light. Golden light, warm and brilliant, erupted from her hands. It was not fire that burned, but fire that gave life. It poured from her, a torrent of pure liquid sunlight, flowing into Kaylin's frozen body. The ice hissed and steamed under her touch. It didn't just melt, it sublimated, turning from solid to vapor, unable to exist in the face of such impossible warmth. The light spread, following the path of the curse, driving the cold back. On her neck, the ugly, jagged brand began to glow with the same golden light. The scar tissue seemed to dissolve, the lines reforming, twisting into a new shape. Not a mark of a criminal, but an intricate, beautiful sigil, a sunburst, a crown of light. The entire throne room was bathed in her golden radiance. The court cried out, shielding their eyes. Valerius stared, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. He wasn't looking at a branded girl anymore. He was looking at a goddess. The fire poured from her, a seemingly endless wellspring of power she never knew she possessed. It wasn't just melting the ice on his skin. She could feel it, deep inside him, reaching the core of his being, the source of his power and his curse. It wasn't destroying the cold. It was balancing it. The fire did not extinguish the ice. It tempered it, contained it, transformed it from a killing frost into a controlled, clean power. She felt the last of the unnatural ice dissolve. She felt his heart, which had all but stopped, give a strong, steady beat. And then another. The light receded, drawing back into her, leaving the room in its normal, gloomy state. The warmth faded, but the suffocating cold did not return. The air was just air, cool and clean. Kaylin gasped. A deep, shuddering breath of a man returned from the dead. His eyes flew open. They were no longer the pale, frozen blue of a winter sea. They were a clear, deep gray, like a storm-washed sky. The haunted, pained look was gone. For the first time, they were truly, completely alive. He looked up at her, his gaze filled with a wonder and adoration that shattered her heart into a million pieces. He lifted his hand, no longer pale and veined with blue, but flushed with life. He touched her cheek. His skin was warm. Tears she hadn't even realized she was holding back streamed down her face. He was warm. "Alara," he breathed, his voice rough with emotion. His gaze fell to her neck, to the glowing golden sunburst where the brand had been. The light pulsed softly in time with her heartbeat, before fading to a delicate, shimmering gold mark on her skin. "The brand," he whispered, his voice full of dawning comprehension and awe. "It was never a criminal's mark. It was a seal to hide your power, to hide you." He pushed himself up, his movements fluid and strong. He was no longer the man burdened by a killing frost. He was whole. He stood and pulled her to her feet, his hands gentle but firm on her arms. He turned to face the stunned, silent court. He looked at Valerius, who was trembling, his face ashen. Kaylin's expression was cold, but it was the cold of a judge, not a monster. "You accused her of being a witch," Kaylin said, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "You were wrong. She is not a witch. She is a miracle. The sun gifted from the old prophecies. The fire to my ice. My mate." He pulled Alara against his side, his arm wrapping around her waist in a gesture that was both possessive and protective. "You did not threaten a criminal. You threatened my queen. For that, there is no forgiveness." He gestured, and the royal guards, his true guards, loyal to the last, seized a sputtering, terrified Valerius. They dragged him away, his cries for mercy echoing and then fading into silence. The rest of the court stood frozen, their faces a mixture of terror and awe. They had witnessed the impossible. They had seen their king die and be reborn. They had seen a branded girl become a source of divine power. "Leave us," Kaelin commanded. They fled, stumbling over each other in their haste to obey. The great doors boomed shut, leaving them alone once more in the vast, silent throne room. The strength that had surged through Alara vanished, leaving her weak and trembling. Her legs gave out. Kaelin caught her, lifting her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. He carried her not to her chambers, but to his own. A stark Spartan room dominated by a massive hearth that had clearly not been lit in centuries. He laid her gently on the bed, pulling the furs around her. He sat on the edge of the bed, his warm hand never leaving her arm. He looked at her, his gray eyes filled with 1,000 emotions she was only just beginning to understand. Regret, relief, love. "I knew," he said softly. "The moment I saw you. The moment I touched your brand. I felt the seal. I felt the fire banked deep within you. I knew what you were." "The sun gifted?" she whispered, the name foreign on her tongue. He nodded. "An old legend. That one day a child of fire would be born to balance the frost curse of my bloodline. My ancestors searched for centuries. I had given up hope. And then my most treacherous lord dragged you to my feet as a worthless offering." A bitter smile touched his lips. "The irony is not lost on me." "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, a hint of accusation in her voice. "Because it had to be your choice," he said, his voice raw. "I saw what was sealed inside you, but I also saw you, Alara, the girl who survived, the woman who showed kindness to a monster. I was already falling in love with you. To tell you that your destiny was to save me, it felt like a cage of a different kind. I couldn't do that to you. I wouldn't." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "But when that ice took me, when I thought I was leaving you alone in this cold world, all I could think was that I was wrong. I should have told you. I should have begged. I wouldn't have let you die," she said, her voice fierce. "Destiny or not. I love you, Kaelin." The words were out. Simple and true. He pulled back, his eyes searching hers. "And I love you, Alara," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he had suppressed for centuries. "I'm saying that I love you, and it's not going to kill me." He smiled then, a true, breathtaking smile that was like seeing the sunrise after a lifetime of winter. It transformed his harsh features into something beautiful and warm. He leaned in and kissed her. It was not a kiss of ice and desperation, but one of warmth and promise. It was a kiss that sealed not a curse, but a bond, a union of ice and fire, made whole. In his arms, for the first time in her life, Alara felt truly, completely warm. She was home. Months passed. Winter receded from the northern kingdom, giving way to a spring the likes of which no one had seen in living memory. The sun seemed to shine brighter. The air felt warmer. The change was not just in the seasons, but in the heart of the kingdom itself. The citadel of ice was no more. It was now the Sunstone Citadel. The oppressive cold had vanished, replaced by a comfortable coolness. Fires burned brightly in every hearth, tapestries in warm colors adorned the walls, and the sound of laughter could, for the first time, be heard in the corridors. Alara, the Sun Queen, was the heart of that change. The people who had once feared and whispered about the branded witch now revered her. They saw the golden sunburst on her neck not as a mark of shame, but as a symbol of hope and rebirth. She moved through the castle not with the timid steps of a servant, but with the quiet confidence of a queen who had earned her crown, not through birthright, but through love and sacrifice. Lord Valerius was a distant memory, imprisoned in the deepest, coldest dungeon of the citadel, a place that remained untouched by Alara's warmth, a fitting end for a man whose heart was made of ice. Kalen was a changed man. The frost curse was gone, his power now balanced and controlled. He was no longer the reclusive, feared Alpha King. He ruled with a strength tempered by compassion, his queen always at his side. The haunted look was gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep, steady love whenever he looked at her. He could touch now. It was a simple miracle he savored every day. He held her hand in council meetings. His arm was a constant, warm presence around her waist, and his fingers would often trace the golden mark on her neck, a silent reminder of how she had saved him. She had saved him as much as he had saved her. One evening, she stood on the balcony of their chambers, overlooking the sprawling, snow-dusted forest below. The air was crisp and clean. She was no longer afraid of the cold. Strong, warm arms wrapped around her from behind. Kalen rested his chin on her shoulder, his breath warm against her ear. "What is my queen thinking about?" he murmured. She leaned back against his solid chest, placing her hands over his where they rested on her stomach. "I was thinking about a girl in rags, kneeling on an icy floor, waiting to be killed by a beast." He tightened his hold, his lips pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. "And I was a beast," he said softly, "trapped in a cage of my own making. You set me free, Alara." "We set each other free," she corrected, turning her head to kiss him. His hands on her stomach were gentle, protective. Beneath his touch, she could feel the faint, fluttering stirrings of a new life, a new beginning. A child of both ice and fire. The world they had built was not one free of challenges. Rival packs still watched from a distance. Old alliances were fragile, and the duties of a king and queen were endless. But they would face it all together. He was no longer just the Alpha King, and she was no longer the branded girl. They were Kalen and Alara, a balance of darkness and light, of winter and spring. They were a love story written in frost and flame, a promise that even in the coldest, darkest places, a single spark of warmth could change everything. The world had given her a choice between the beast and her life. She had chosen the beast, and in doing so, had found a life greater than she could ever have imagined.